trick a little bit fast. I got it. Hi, Z-Man Pro Bryan Thrift here, and I'm going to talk to you about a bait that's been on the market for a little over a year now that I personally designed for Z-Man, a new addition to the chatterbait lineup. This is the new Big Blade Chatterbait. It has a 70% larger blade than your average size chatterbait, so it gives you 3 times as much thump and vibration as a regular size chatterbait, but it still has all the same features, all the same calling power, and gets you so much more ferocious strikes. It's built on a 5/0 Mustad needle point hook. We have sizes from 1/2 ounce, 3/4, and 5/8. This particular model I have here is the 3/4 ounce. All the skirts I hand-picked, hand-designed them myself. I actually tied the skirts together the way I like them, the way I throw them, sent them to Z-Man. They copied them to a T, because I'm a tweaker. I like to put my own little touch on every bait I use, and this bait is exactly how I would throw it right out of the package. There's nothing that I change on this bait before I start fishing it. I can throw it a long ways. I can cover water from 2 inches deep all the way out to 20, 25 feet with it. It's just a great all-purpose, hard-thumping, big-bladed chatterbait. When you're choosing trailer and color options for the big bladed chatterbait, as you can see here, I carry one of every color and every size that is offered across the board in the big bladed chatterbait. And the way I usually break it up is I have a shad colored box, which covers all my shad colors, chartreuse and whites, your natural colors like the threadfin shad. And then I have a bluegill colored box or crawfish colored box, something that's going to imitate a darker color like your black and blue, your brim colored, your browns, and then I've got the orange blade in here as well. So that's how I separate them as far as storage goes, so I am more efficient on the water when I get in a situation where I need to change colors. I know all my shad colors are in one box, all my bluegill crawfish colors are in another box. I can reach in there and get the one I want, and I have them broken down by sizes. So I've got 1/2 ounce, 5/8, 3/4 in each box, in each slot, all the way across to cover any scenario I'm going to run into on the water. And that's the beauty of a chatterbait, and that's the reason I feel like I need one of everything, is because I can fish this bait from inches of water out to 25 feet of water. And that is something I'm gonna get into in just a second when I start talking about your trailer size. But as far as color options go, if you're on a shad bite, typically I'm throwing a shad color, which is fairly obvious. And I typically wind my shad pattern chatterbaits faster than I do my bluegill and crawfish patterns. And to me, that just imitates that shad a lot more. Rarely do you see a crawfish or a bluegill really getting after it in the water. So that's more of a slow speed retrieve. And when I've got my shad patterns, I'm using a faster, more erratic retrieve to generate those reaction strikes and trying to imitate a fleeing bait fish. And one of my favorite things to do with the shad pattern, and something a lot of people don't think about with a chatterbait, is they kind of try to pigeonhole it into a shallow water bait, shallow vegetation, shallow dirty water, something like that. But this big bladed chatterbait is awesome stroking it out deep on ledges. I throw the 3/4 ounce, and I put the trailer I use is just a small thin shaped trailer like I have here. So you can see it's not going to catch a lot of water, not a lot of drag, so it's going to let that bait fall faster, and I'm going to be able to stroke it up on the ledges. I pretty much fish it just like you would a flutter spoon or something like that. I bomb my cast out there, watch the line, let that bait get all the way to bottom, and then I just rip it up, and I can feel that blade vibrate up, let it fall back down, vibrate it back up, let it fall back down. And those fish will absolutely hammer this big blade chatterbait out deep because it's something they haven't seen a lot of. You know, they've seen a million crankbaits, they've seen a million flutter spoons, a million hair jigs, but they don't see that big blade chatterbait down there a lot, and it gets some vicious strikes. As far as color selections go in shallow water, it's normally, if I'm around grass or spring of the year and dirtier water, I'm leaning towards this box. I'm throwing more of your crawfish patterns, your black and blues, this coleslaw with the orange blade if the water's dirty. And in that scenario, I go with a bigger, bulkier trailer because I'm going to be slow rolling that bait. You know, the water, if it may be pre-spawn, the water could be anywhere from the low 50s to the low 60s. and the fish aren't quite as active and they're sitting tighter to structure. So I want to really be able to slow roll that big bladed chatterbait, and that's essentially what I designed it to be able to do the best, is slow roll, give a lot of feedback to the angler so you know exactly what that blade's doing down there, and get those vicious strikes from those big pre-spawn bass. So a big trailer that catches a lot of water, moves a lot of water, really slows that bait down. That's what I prefer on my brim colored, crawfish colored baits. And when I go to my shad pattern baits, I prefer some type of swim bait like the 4-inch Demiki Armor shad swim bait, or something straight tail trailer like this is a Fluke, or a straight tail Demiki Armor shad, something like that that doesn't have a lot of drag, that's gonna let that bait dart around, be a lot more erratic, and allow me to fish that bait a little bit deeper at a faster speed. Well, let's get into a little bit of the how, when, and why with the big bladed chatterbait. You know, it's a bait that I feel like a lot of anglers, you know, they throw it a lot pre-spawn and spawn, and then they kind of put it down during the summer months and then maybe pick it up again in the fall. But this is definitely not the case for me, especially with the big blade chatterbait. So pre-spawn scenarios, I'm reaching for my crawfish colors, my darker colors, even the coleslaw if I'm in a dirty water situation. But the reason for that, and especially around grass in the pre-spawn, this big blade chatterbait comes through grass and comes through structure better than any other chatterbait on the market. Plus, it's a lot more erratic and makes a lot more noise. And the variable speed retrieves you can do with this bait shallow is pretty amazing when you really get out there and start toying with it and seeing what all this bait will do. So when I'm throwing these baits pre-spawn, typically I'm fishing it 6 feet or less, 5 feet or less, depending on the vegetation, the grass, the height of the grass, and you know what area of the country I'm in. You know, if I'm down in Florida pre-spawn, I'm going to be throwing this bait in 2 to 2.5 feet of water, versus if I'm on a muddy, shallow, rocky lake, you know, I may be slow rolling it on a rip-rap bank in 5 to 6 feet of water, you know, letting it get down there a little deeper because that water's a little colder and a little dirtier. Those fish are going to set tight to those rocks. But the cool thing about this bait pre-spawn is I can put it on a 20-pound diameter line, 20-pound line, but the whole key to it is the diameter of the line. That allows that bait to really work slow and be able to crawl it along the bottom. As I said earlier, the big blade, the way it allows it to deflect off a cover, it comes through stuff way better than any other chatterbait on the market. If you can see there, the hook point to the blade is only about 3/16 of an inch. So when you come up to a limb or come up to a rock, that blade's gonna fold back because it's gonna hit your line. So say this is my arm's the limb and this bait's coming through the water. When my line comes up to that log, it's gonna fold that blade back and allow it doesn't let it roll over and get hung as much as a regular sized chatterbait. So it comes through cover great, making it a great shallow water chatterbait. And those lethargic fish in cold water, this thing is putting out a ton of vibration and a ton of action without really moving forward at a fast pace. So those fish have a little bit longer to react and, you know, decide if they're gonna chase it down. It's in their face, it's making them mad. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's gonna piss them off and make those big fish bite in the pre-spawn. When I get into the spawning phase, and that kind of coincides a lot with a shad spawn type bite. That's when I start transitioning over to my shad colored big bladed chatterbaits a little bit more, when I get from midway through the spawn till the end, like post spawn. Shad spawn bites in full effect. This big blade it's a sight to see, especially when you put a thin style trailer on it, something that doesn't catch a lot of drag. You can throw it a long ways and really wind it fast, and it's very erratic. Like it's hunting all over the place. When you're burning that thing across the water, you know, it's gonna be with the 1/2 or the 5/8. When you're winding it pretty fast, it's gonna get down about 1.5 or 2 foot. With the 3/4 ounce, you're gonna be able to keep it down in that 3 to 4 foot range and be able to wind it fast, and it's just gonna hunt around. It might peel off 2 or 3 feet to the left, straighten up, run a little bit to the right, and it just gives you that perfect, you know, fleeing action to generate those strikes from fish that are keying in on a shad spawn. And that's the time of year I see a lot of anglers put down the chatterbait, period. Doesn't matter if it's, you know, a jackhammer or the big blade. Most people quit throwing it in the summer, but to me, that's one of the times the big blade chatterbait really shines, is fishing it deep on ledges and around structure in the summertime. And again, fishing it around brush piles, as I said earlier, how it comes through brush so well. The way I like to fish it the most that time of year is a stroking retrieve. So I'm firing the bait out there, letting it get to the bottom, and then I'm ripping my rod up like I was fishing a flutter spoon. Just rip it up, just rip it, let it fall back down, and that blade will vibrate when it comes up. So it's going brrr, and then it falls back down. So it's almost like you're fishing a blade bait or a flutter spoon, but you've got the action of that big bladed chatterbait and that erratic fall. When it's falling, the blade falls back against the bait and it allows it to spiral down and just gives it a natural dying bait fish look. It's something very unique, and it gets a lot of bites offshore. So that's some of the different scenarios that I throw these baits in. I'm sure you guys will figure out more and better ways to use it than I have. So I'm looking forward to it. When it comes to fall fishing with the big bladed chatterbait, I'm strictly shad colors then. And a lot of places in the fall, fish start schooling on little small bait fish, which you would think that's kind of weird to throw the big bladed chatterbait when you get in that scenario. But when I do find that on a lake, typically in the fall when that water starts cooling off, you get big gizzard shad that start running up in feeder creeks. They get way back in pockets, way back in somewhere there's fresh water coming in, and that's where I can get way back in that shallow water and imitate those big gizzard shad with the big bladed chatterbait. I typically go with the natural shad pattern here. It's got a natural clear coated head, so it's not very obtrusive. I can wind it really fast in that shallow stained water and get those big fish that are up there chasing those big bait to bite a little bit better in the fall versus being out there on those schooling fish chasing little teeny tiny bait. And plus it makes me feel like a man. I'm throwing a big bait fishing for big fish. When it comes to wintertime fishing with the big bladed chatterbait, to me this is one of my favorite times to go fun fishing. There's not a lot of tournaments, like at least national level tournaments that I'm in that time of year, but it's the best time of year to get on the water and catch the biggest fish of your life, or the biggest fish you're gonna catch all year long. And the big bladed chatterbait is one of my favorite things to do then. The biggest key for me when I'm throwing the big blade chatterbait in the winter is I want to find slightly stained water. I don't want really clear water, and I don't want really muddy water. I want some of that in-between stuff that's got, you know, maybe 1.5 to 2.5 feet of visibility, where those fish are going to be staging up, getting ready for pre-spawn in that 8 to 12 foot depth range around brush, around rock, bridge pilings, something like that, that I can really slow roll that bait by and even get those suspended fish, or those fish that are not really setting on the bottom but a couple feet off the bottom, to react to a slow moving, hard thumping big bait. You know, it's a big easy meal. It's coming through the water column really slow and just getting in their face and making those big female pre-spawn bass bite in that early winter period. I'm usually leaning toward a shad pattern that time of year, and my rationality behind that is the water's colder. It's probably the coldest water you're going to fish all year, and bait fish aren't as active. You know, they're a little more lethargic. If you get water temps down, you know, in the upper 40s, you start having a shad die off, and that's one of my absolute favorite times, because those big fish just sit there and gorge on those dying shad, and I can slow roll this big blade chatterbait through the water column and get them to bite. So any scenario where you're considering slow rolling a big bladed spinnerbait, or just a spinnerbait in general, this big bladed chatterbait will give him a different look and help you put a lot more fish in the box in the wintertime. The gear I like to use when I'm throwing the Z-Man Big Bladed Chatterbait is pretty technique specific. The rod I use is a 7.2 to 7.5 range is kind of what you're going to want to look for, something in the heavy action. I want a heavy rod because this bait is built around a 6/0 Mustad needlepoint hook. It's a little heavier wire, it's built for big fish, and I want a rod that's going to be able to handle those fish. The rod I personally use is a 7.3 heavy action stunner from Fitzgerald Fishing. To me, it has the right action. It's got a little bit of a soft tip where I can really feel that blade thumping, but it's got a lot of backbone where I can put a lot of pressure on those fish. I'm throwing it on a 20-pound P-line tactical fluorocarbon, so I can just do what I want with these big fish in the pre-spawn time of year. Or if I'm stroking this bait out deep, like I mentioned earlier, I've got a long enough, stiff enough rod that I can drive that hook on the end of a long cast. So this rod will handle any situation I'm throwing this bait in, from, you know, 1.5 feet deep out to 25 feet deep. As far as a reel selection that you're going to want to select for the big bladed chatterbait, I vary that based on the time of year and what I'm going to be doing with the bait. So early in the year, pre-spawn, spawn, I use a slower speed reel, something in the 6.4 to 6.6 gear ratio range. And then as I progress farther into the summer and the fish get more active, I jump up to a 7.3 gear ratio to a 8.0 gear ratio so I can wind that bait faster. And even in the summertime, when you're fishing it on ledges, when those fish bite you on a slack line, you want a fast reel that you can take up a lot of slack and get that hook drove in them and get a good hook set. The reel I use is a Abu Garcia Revo STX. This is the 8.0 version because we're here in the summertime. Like I said, the two different gear ratios I use based on the time of year and the retrieve speed I'm going to be using, that helps me select the gear ratio I'm going to use. And the line I mentioned earlier is 20-pound P-line tactical. You know, I want a big fluorocarbon. I've even bumped it up to 25-pound before when I'm fishing heavy grass and I'm gonna really be ripping that bait out of the grass, and I want it to fall a little bit slower and move a little bit slower. But as a mainstay, something in that 20-pound test class range is gonna be perfect for the big bladed chatterbait. Thank you guys for checking out this video on the new Z-Man Big Bladed Chatterbait. If you're looking for a bigger, harder thumping, more erratic chatterbait in your arsenal, this is the bait for you. Make sure you go check out the new Big Blade Chatterbait.